black storm coming. See the lightning strike. Black people rising.
America freed the slaves in 1863 through the Emancipation Proclamation, but gave the slaves no land or nothing in reality to get started on. At the same time, America was giving away millions of acres of land in the West and the Midwest, which meant that there was a willingness to give the white peasants from Europe an economic base. And yet it refused to give its black peasants from Africa, who came here involuntarily in chains and had worked free for 244 years, any kind of economic base. And so emancipation for the Negro was really freedom to hunger. It was freedom to the winds and rains of heaven. It was freedom without food to eat or land to cultivate, and therefore it was freedom and famine at the same time. I believe we ought to do all we can and seek to lift ourselves by our own bootstraps. But it's a cruel jest to say to a bootless man that he ought to lift himself by his own bootstraps. And many Negroes, by the thousands and millions, have been left bootless as a result of all of these years of oppression and as a result of a society that deliberately made his color a stigma and something worthless and degrading.
Hello and welcome to another edition of the Umoja Circle. My name is Keith Smokin Johnson. I'd like to welcome you to this discussion that I usually have for you. I think that for those of you who are familiar with the show, the Umoja Circle is an African-centered talk show in which we correct errors where errors are found and introduce facts where I find that so many people are working on fiction when it comes to who we are as people of African descent. And I always believe in history, and I always use history, and I always use my sources of my topics of my show based on the books that I read and I introduce you to, in order to make the concept of what I'm talking about on these shows. And today I'm going to deal with the two twins that came out of the racist history of America. You got the political racism and economic racism when it comes to people of African descent. Why there is such a generational wealth gap between the dominant group, or white America, since 1776 and the signing of the Declaration of Independence and the Constitution. And people today, even in the 21st century, we hear about this wealth gap. Why is it? And, is there something wrong with people of African descent? No, we're just like anybody else that came to this land. We were brought over here, as you heard from the video clip of Martin Luther King. He said that there was, we came over here not by our own choice, but we were forced over here. But one of the things that, when I'm talking about economic racism, he said something that was interesting in what you most likely heard. When land was given in the 1800s by the federal government to the European peasants, most of you might not know of, but most of you, I'm sure, might have heard of the Homestead Act. And the Homestead Act came out in 1862, right in the heart of the Civil War. The Congress dedicated millions of acres of land, as Martin Luther King said, to the west and the southwest of the United States at the time, and and they were given these lands, I think 160-acre lots, to people who would be able to. All you had to be is a citizen or a person as an immigrant who was on the path of becoming a citizen. You were entitled to these 160. You had to be on there for 5 years. Okay. Also, women were able to do that if she was a citizen, by paper, but in reality that was very difficult, of course, also. But guess who was left out of it? The people who was on that land for thousands of years, the native people, and that land came because America took over that land through treaties and was supposed to be the guardians of that land. But what did? They betrayed the native people again and sold that land and offered that land for free for 5 years to those peasants who were coming in on the East Coast and going west. And there was no benevolence to that, just to do that, because what happens when you bring towns and communities in those western lands that were open spaces, you pay taxes. So the form of the federal government know that once those folks settle there, then they'll be getting those taxes from those newly planted American citizens. And that was one of the reasons for that. You had the land grants, or you had these state colleges and places like that, North Carolina State or Iowa State, and all these universities were also attributed to each state were given land for these education, again, for white people only, okay, which made generational wealth possible. So you got land if you were white, even as a white peasant coming from Europe, and you were given, that way you could pass this land down to people. So when you hear people today who say, I'm a fifth generation or sixth generation American on this land, well, most likely you were given that welfare program, okay, to do that, okay? That was the thing, So when we had these programs that came out in the 60s for blacks that people are complaining about, okay, and wondering why we're doing that, why we had the civil rights bills, why we had these kinds of acts, affirmative actions. Well, what do you think those laws were? The Homestead Act, that was affirmative action for white people, and they gave them that right, and we had to catch up. Okay, that's only been 50 years ago, 60 years ago, and it's still been a struggle for those 60 years to 50 years. We see what's going on today in the news. Okay, they're trying to roll back all those little gains that we made. Why? Because that's always been white backlash. Every time black people made some gains, okay, it was always a white backlash, and it's always been a struggle. Okay, let me start my discussion with this statement I want you to understand. This is what I do in this show. I always use historical history to talk about the present. So even though I'm talking about the present and what the issues are today when it comes to race, economics, wealth gap, I always go to the past. Until you understand, in order to understand the present, you must understand the precedents or what came before this present moment. You cannot understand the problems today unless you understand the historical things that happened along the way to get us to this point. That's the purpose of what I do in this show. And this topic is going to be no different about political racism and economic racism. They're combined to keep the issue. It wasn't because of our inability to do things, because we're great inventors, we're great innovators, we built this country, but other people benefited from our wealth. That's the purpose of what people talk about reparations. They're talking about in the context of this. You've used us for 246 years, but we need reparation because we were not paid. Let's go on to the next slide. You cannot fix a problem, of course, unless you can see it. And I want you to see why I am bringing this topic off and why in the 21st century, in 2025, we still need to discuss this issue. Let's go on. Today, as Americans, we are called to examine and update a social structure called racism. Whether I'm talking about economic racism and political racism, there's social racism, but racism itself, built a long time ago. This is something that's been part of the American structure from its founding, not only in the Constitution, but going back to colonial times. Let's go on to the next. Yet, like any old houses, America has many unseen issues with its foundational structure. One such issue, a remnant of enslavement and Jim Crow apartheid here in America, though by laws passed and through laws passed have been dismantled, their remnants have warped into a current multi-layered racial system we call racism today. Enslavement by law in 1865 died, but the remnants of it, the psychological condition, the cultural conditioning still exists to this day. That's Jim Crow segregation, another 100 years. And then we had to deal with from 1865 to 1965 and to 2005, we're still dealing with its remnants, racism. That's still in there, and we got to face it and talk about it. Let's go on to the next. We current people of African descent today still have to deal with this reconstituted version of a racist social structure in its current state. That's why we bring up the study of race. That's why we talk about reparations. That's why we're still marching. That's why we're saying no justice, no peace today, because if you're a white American, you have that privilege not to deal with it. It had nothing to do with your wealth. Well, in a sense, it does, because of that generational wealth. Like I said, the system was structured for you guys. It wasn't structured for us or Native Americans or Latino Americans. It was not done that. It was done deliberately to keep us out. That's the economic racism that I'm talking about. Two separate Americas. Let's start with that thought. Let's go on to the next. Okay, which still is a dangerous social environment we must all still face and fix as a nation, so that the whole of the social structure of America can start to truly function correctly. The whole of America had never been functioning correctly since the founding of this country. Understand this truth. It's always been. It was deliberately created by that document called the Constitution. All men created equal did not mean black men and women, did not mean Native American women, or did not mean women, period. It was white elite men. Okay? That's what the people meant in that document. Let's go on to the next one. Sad but true, this American system, racism, that most Americans don't even want to face, has been essential to the building of this American structure. All America is now occupied. Just as the studs and joists we can't see in a finished building that was built 250 years ago, we call our home. Let's go on to the next one. This structure, racism, was created by the early colonial laws of this land, which that's what I'm saying earlier, which has now become an unconscious code of instructions that has maintained a 400-year-old hierarchical social structure. This we the people, this land of the free, did not exist for people that look like me and many of you out there who did not look like Native people. It did not look like the people who were influenced by the Chinese who came over to build the railroads. It was just for white men, period. It wasn't even for white women until, who didn't even get the right to vote until the 20th century, okay? This country was established in the 1600s. It went on for the 1700s, the 1800s, 1900s. Okay, in most of the 20th century, it was dominated by white men. That was the people that this country was built to deal with, and the laws and the structures were dealt to deal with, gave them the right. Affirmative action was in play from the beginning for white men in this country. Okay, so let's get that straight. The mythology is different. It's in the books. Let's get that straight. Let's go on to the next. This house we call America, that was built hundreds of years ago. In 2026, we're coming on the 250-year anniversary of this house, and we still have to work on it. Look what's going on right now in Washington with the Republicans and MAGA and all these things. Are we saying the same things our ancestors said in the 60s, in the 50s, in the early 1900s, in the late 1800s, in the early 1800s? We still want liberation and freedom to be free. All men are created equal. We still got to bring that into fruition. Those words have not yet been fulfilled 250 years later. And as any current owners of the old house, for those of you who said I didn't exist back then, no, you are the current owner of that house. You don't go into an old house that you built in, say, New England, and it's a 250-year-old house. You're going to go move in without bringing updates, without doing the things that needs to be fixed, not bringing it up to code. If you go into that house and say, I didn't build this house, so I'm not going to do anything, will that make sense? It's your turn to fix this house. Those of you who exist right now. I'm talking to you, white America. Let's go on to the next. Go on. And as with any old house, this work is never done, and you never expect it to be. You don't expect to, even a modern house, you're going to update it, you're going to paint it, you're going to do something extra, you're going to redesign the interior. You're going to constantly update houses as you go along. But what about this house called America? You don't want to fix it. You don't want to know about the history, and yet you're wondering why it's not functioning. Well, look at any old house that's falling apart around you if you don't do the things that is necessary for you to do. Ignorance is no protection from the consequences of inaction. Let's not forget that. Let's go on to the next. Today, white America, and again, I'm talking to you today, must come to realize that when it comes to the discussion of race in America, whatever you are wishing away will continue to nibble and gnaw at you until you gather the courage to face that which you rather not see. That's that white privilege. I don't understand. We have all this, disconnection today. America has always been separate. It's always been a disconnect. Why? Because the reason you're shocked by it is because you've waken up to the truth that you couldn't face all that time. But the truth is hitting you in the face right now, and you notice that all of a sudden there's a lot of disagreements. There's a lot of disruptions in America. No, it's always been that. But you were privileged not to notice it, okay? That which you rather not see. Some deliberately did not want to see that, okay? Let's go on to the next. Americans today have inherited a house that looks nice on the outside for white America. It never looked nice for black people, people of African descent, or Native people, or any other group that's been oppressed in this country, whose internal structure still needs a lot of fixing. Look at how it fell apart when this current administration just came into office in less than, not even a whole year, from January of 2025 until right now, it seems like things are falling apart quickly. Well, if you don't deal with the infrastructure, like a domino effect, once things start messing up, is a cascading effect. And that's what we're dealing in America. So let's go on to the next with this. I've heard many white Americans say through the years, I had nothing to do with how all this started. I know many of you, brothers and sisters, have heard this too. I had nothing to do with the sins of the past. Yes, you are the recipients of it. You are the inheritors of this house, and it's your job to fix it too. You just can't leave it to black people to protest and all this stuff, and then wondering why we're constantly having to do that, because we take 10 steps forward and then we get things knocked back because they're the forces that want to maintain the hierarchy. Okay? And usually it's white men and those who are in power that want to go back to those times when they dominated. That's what we're seeing today, okay? If you look at the MAGA movement. Let's go on to the next one. Yet I say here, we are the current occupants of the house. That's what I'm saying. That now has the stress cracks, the bold walls, and the fissures in its foundation. You're seeing it, white America, and you're shocked. It doesn't shock black people. That's why we're not reacting the way you tend to react when I look at the news, the outrage and the shock, and why America is always divisive. America has always been divisive. You've been part of the group that this system was meant for, so you didn't understand and didn't see it or ignored it and just looked at it as something in history. No, we looked at it everyday life as people of African descent, and that's my point. That's political and economic and social racism exists from day one, and it exists right now. Let's go on to the next. All history is current event. That's my point. For the action that was initiated in the past, the cause has an effect on what's going on right now. Let's remember that. Let's go on to the next thought. At the heart of the American story exists a disturbing central paradox, that a democracy exists which declared, like I said earlier, all men are created equal, yet enslaved and oppressed a large part of its population to provide independence and prosperity for another part of its population, white America, okay? This is the truth, okay? This is the truth that you do not want to face, and you must face it in order to have that truth and reconciliation that face the problem to deal with that, because we don't have a shared memory. Your memory is of Leave It to Beaver and all those things and suburbia. Our memory is a totally different thing. And you can't have discussions when you come from two different realities, okay? Two Americas. Let's go on to the next. This nation was literally built on the backs of and forcefully kidnapped and enslaved portion of its population. That's our memory. Let's go on to the next one. That's Native Americans' memory. Of the first 16 U.S. presidents, to give you an example, 11 owned enslaved people, 8 owned enslaved persons while in office. Okay? This paradox of white American myth still to this very day in the 21st century talks about the wonders of the Constitution and the right it gave America, especially to the right to vote. This is the mythology that my children, I had to listen to as a black kid while I would experience the racism that you did not have to experience in white America. This is the actual truth. And you have to face this truth, and that's the only way. In order to deal with a wound, you got to first say that you have the wound. Then you'll be able to clean the wound in order for it to heal. And until we face the wounds that has been created by this white supremacist reality of what America was built on, not the land of the free, it was the land of the free for those who were elite, not even the poor whites. That was the crazy thing, that you believed the hype that they told you that somehow you were free when they controlled the system to maintain their elite status, just like in Europe with the nobles and then there was the peasants. Same thing here in America. It did not change. Let's go on to the next. But the historical reality for we people of African descent, like I said, shows that the right was denied to us by law until signing of the 15th amendment in 1869. This was the right to vote. 82 years after the ratification of the American Constitution. Okay, this is the political aspects of what I'm talking about, racism. 82 years, but yet I'm told constantly, and I'm shown documentaries about the Revolutionary War and the Founding Fathers and all that stuff when we were not even 3/5 of a human being to those men, those elite men. No different than the corporate giants, elites today who are manipulating the political and social and economic systems today. Nothing has changed until you face this truth. Let's go on. Yet even 155 years later, that's today, in 2025, after the passing of the 15th Amendment on February 3rd, 1870, which on paper gave African men the right to vote, it's been a violent struggle to fulfill that right ever since. So in 1870, we were given the right to vote as black men. Black women didn't even have the right, but they were still persecuted and had to deal with racism and sexism and all these other things, for another number of decades until the 1865 Voting Rights Act. Okay, almost 100 years later. Why we needed an 1865 Voting Rights Act? Because nobody fulfilled this law. Nobody dealt with it. We tried to deal with it, and we went and voted, but then we had to deal with segregation, Jim Crow, apartheid. Okay, white people, white men put another system in of control, even though we were supposedly freed in 1865. From in 246 years of uncompensated labor. Let's go on to race in America has always shaped America's concept of democracy, culture, and citizenship. Let's not forget this truth. Let's go on to the next. Our African American ancestors understood from the beginning that politics along with economics was the way to power in this country, the power to be able to achieve your particular needs and interests. This system was set up as a perpetual war, multiple interest groups, okay? Multiple interest groups. Hancock and many of the founding fathers understood those things, okay? Let's go on to the next. Each interest groups will keep each other in check, just like a war. Fighting for the hill, you're going to have strategies and all. Our ancestors understood that, but we had added problems when they put other laws specifically segregation laws, Jim Crow laws, all kinds of barriers to our even getting the right to vote for 100 years after our so-called freedom. Okay, when the democratic system was first set up in 1787 with the creation of the United States Constitution, it was first set up in such a way to serve the needs of those in power, the elites like themselves. Okay, that's one of the things our ancestors understood. You had to have power, political power. For those of you who don't want to vote or don't think the system doesn't work, that's the way the system is. Winston Churchill said that democracy is a terrible thing, but compared to all the other forms of government in this world, this is the best thing going. So if you don't participate in the system, even the way it is set, it's a setup like a war. And if your interest is you're not willing to fight in that war to maintain your interest, to take that hill when other interest groups are after that, the benefits found on the top of that hill, you're not going to, and you wonder why it doesn't work for you if you sit back and don't do anything. If you don't participate in the system, in the political war. It's an old saying that says that war is politics with bloodshed, but politics is war without bloodshed. The same type of devastation can be done as we've seen in the last 10 months, from the political arena when MAGA is in charge. No different than a war in which communities been wiped out. Citizens have been, their rights have been taken. That's a war. Those are the casualties of war. Let's go on to the next one. Then I'm going to slow it up and I'm going to do a second part. So I'm not going to be finishing stuff. But I think I'm going to leave it here. So you see, in order to understand the present moment, which is, if you listen to the word present, P-R-E, and then you make a space, S-E-N-T, it's pre-sent moment. So the present moment was sent to you by results of what was happened in the past. And we'll continue this discussion. We'll continue this thing, and we'll see that America has a lot of work. This old house, and its 250th anniversary in 2026, that we need to deal with. But until next time, peace, hotep, bye-bye.